Daily Rambam for Wednesday, Yud Cheshem Tavshin Peyal, third Perek of Hilchos Shabbos. So yesterday we learned about Pikuach Nefesh on Shabbos, and now we're moving on to the topic of starting a malacha on Erev Shabbos, and especially the most famous one is putting something on the fire, which is going to cook over Shabbos. So you're starting the malacha Erev Shabbos, and it's going to go into Shabbos.
We'll coincide those halachas now with the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch tonight.
Okay. Fair in contrast.
We did.
Okay. So halacha Aleph. In theory, in essence, you are allowed to start malacha in the hours before Shabbos. Even though the malacha will continue and be completed on Shabbos itself, because we're only prohibited from doing malacha on the actual day. But if it happens on its own, and the only act we did was before Shabbos, we are allowed to enjoy whatever happened on its own on Shabbos. So you go straight into some examples. Base Ketzad. So for example, so you can open an irrigation channel, you're letting water into the garden, and it continues watering and filling up on Shabbos. You can put some incense under some clothes, and the whole Shabbos they're getting this nice aroma from the incense. You can put a salve, some kind of salve on the eye, or a bandage. So yes, yesterday, if you're fixing we said yesterday you can take a broken limb and you can realign it. So what about putting a cast over it? So here we see that even a bandage really is considered a form of refuah. So, however, if you did it Erev Shabbos, so even though it's continuing to heal you throughout Shabbos, that's still okay. And you can you mix ink and herbs together. We learned in Hilchos about making ink. So you're mixing that stuff together and it's soaking, and it goes throughout Shabbos. You can put wool into a vat or strands of flax into an oven, and it's changing the color. The color you're painting them. They're going to acquire a color over the course of Shabbos. You put out a trap for whatever creature, beast, birds, fish, and they can get trapped. They walk into the trap on their own on Shabbos. But you can load the beams of an olive press or the stones of a grape press, and you load it on the fruits. And as Shabbos is going, the juice is flowing. And you can light a candle or this is maybe the most obvious, the most familiar. You can light a fire or some kind of just a candle before Shabbos, and then you have light or you have warmth over the course of the whole Shabbos. Now, the ones that have to do with fire in particular are going to get mentioned again throughout the Perek, because as we're going to see, when it comes to cooking, we're very nervous about fire. So why did we say that some of these other things that involve fire are okay? So we're going to see throughout the Perek. Now he moves on to the next example, which is going to be the main central example that we're going to discuss a lot. Halacha Gimel. So you can put a pot on the fire, or meat in the oven, or meat on the coals, and it continues cooking. You can eat on Shabbos, even though the cooking occurred on Shabbos. That's not the problem, that cooking is occurring on Shabbos and you're enjoying it, because we already established that malachos can happen on their own if you set them up to do that. However, there's a problem. However, there's ways of doing this that are prohibited. And the one thing all the problems have in common is always we're afraid you're going to start shifting around the coals in the midst of Shabbos, and that's why we're going to have a whole bunch of rules of what's allowed. So for example, so you have a dish or water that aren't fully cooked, aren't fully boiled. Or even if it was fully cooked, but some extra warmth, some extra cooking would be good for it. So you can't just leave it there on the fire over the whole Shabbos, even though you left it there while it was still out of Shabbos. We're afraid that you might start shifting the coals around because you want it to make sure that it finishes cooking or that it continues being improved. Now you have two options. You have Gadaf Aish, which usually referred to as Grufa. So you just you shovel the whole fire out, or you cover the fire in the kira. And here the Rambam identifies we're talking about a kira, which is a stove that has, we're going to see later, has multiple, at least two openings on top. So if you cover the fire in the kira with ashes or some flax, some thin flax, so that's called ketuma. So you have grufa or ketuma, or the coals themselves are already pretty low. They're not very hot anymore. So then it's like they're covered in ashes. Or you simply lit it with the kind of fuel that's not the kind that you really are going to play around with. It's just straw or excrement from an animal. There are no actual coals here that you would be able to shift. So then you could leave the fire, the pot on, the meat on directly. Because when you put it on and you knew that there's not really what to be chaysa over here, so you sort of put it out of your mind. So we no longer have exerted at all. Maybe you will play around with the fire. The Kesef Mishnah quotes the Ramach here. The Ramach has a question. The Rambam said that hisiach daitoi. So he says, how was he mesiach das? He plans on eating it, possibly tonight. And he didn't say that he has another thing to eat. So why would you say that he forgot about it? No, the real reason is because of grufa and ketuma. Simply that prevents you from being chaysa, not hisiach daitoi. Kesef Mishnah says that according to the Rambam, that grufa includes being mesiach das. If you look at the Alter Rebbe, I'm sure there's a lot you can quote from the Alter Rebbe, but I'll just quote just a little bit here from the beginning of Simulation on Gimel, which deals with these halachas. So the way the Alter Rebbe says it is, if you have a kira, and it has the gefes or the eitzim, and I'm going to mention terms gefes or eitzim yet, because I mentioned it soon. That's the standard fuel that has gechalim. So if you lit the kira with the gefes or eitzim with wood, so then you can't leave the tafshel on it. Erev Shabbos, assuming that it was called Kamaichel Ben Deresoy. That I never mentioned that term, but the term that you go with in halacha is Maichel Ben Deresoy. So Shema Yachta, so you might turn the coals around with a shovel. Unless it's grufa, you swept it all out. Ketuma, you covered it, and then the Alter Rebbe adds that you don't have to cover it completely until you can't tell there's any fire at all. Just a little bit, and even if the fire comes roaring back, so is it really ketuma? The Alter Rebbe says klum, because the kiven shegila daite. Just by doing the gesture, by showing, by indicating what your intention is, that you don't need the gechalim, shovein lacha shemayachta b'Shabbos. And then he mentions also the gechalim if they just are very weak. That itself is like ketuma. Now nowadays, of course, we have a blech. That's the very common thing to do. So now actually, there's really a discussion on Paiskim. Would just putting a sheet of metal on top of the fire be considered like ketuma? That's not mentioned here. We're talking about actually putting something over the fire itself that weakens the fire. Here you're just sliding a sheet of metal in between.
Why encourage chamin b'Shabbos if you have all these shilas? That we have to have chamin b'Shabbos. Look what it's bringing up. It's an unbelievable amount of shilas.
Right.
But they encourage, dafka you have to have chamin b'Shabbos.
Well, you have that famous line that they quote from the Baal Amar about, he's implying that if you don't, then that shows that you're sympathetic to the Karaites. So you have to show that, of course, we say it's mutter, and that's Homnick Shabbos. Homnick Shabbos is to have warm food.
So it's to have it, but still be super careful, etc., etc.
Yeah. All foods that they ate in those days were probably prepared in this kind of way. You want to have meat on Shabbos, you're going to cook it, then you've no way to preserve it really, so it comes straight off the fire. That's the Homnick Shabbos. So the first source that can be applied to the Shayal of the Blech is that in the Hagayos Mordechai, B'Sheis quotes from the Hagayos Mordechai, there's Mordechai, there's the Hagayos on the Mordechai that says that if you want to wake up in the morning and you're afraid that your dish is going to get burned, So he says you can take it off and you put a kedera, a konis. You can put an empty pot on the kira, and that's like a grufa ktuma because the kedera is blocking the entrance of the kira, and then you put your pot on top. The Shulchan Aruch brings this. So this seems to be the makar that putting some metal, something like that, even though you're not technically affecting the fire itself, would be ketuma. So then a blach would be the same thing. Mishnah Brura. And the Achreinim say that it's not that the fire has to be, meaning ketuma implies that you're actually weakening the fire. Most Achreinim said it was someone who wanted to be machmer and say that no, it has to actually weaken the fire. Most Achreinim said no. But nowadays, when it came to the Shah of the Blech, they said the fire, it could be unaffected. The fire could be, you don't have to touch the fire as long as it's just it's a hacker. That's the minhag. Everyone
covering the controls of the fire.
Now, what about covering the actual controls of the fire? So until now, by default, I'm just talking about covering the fire. What about covering the controls? So Rav Moshe Feinstein Taka Paskin, that you also have to cover the controls, because otherwise, what did you really cover here?
That's the whole.
Where's the chaysa? How would you be chaysa? Would you touch the fire? Would you touch the knobs? However, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said that the whole logic here is gilei das, a hacker. You're just indicating that you're not interfering with it. So then the blech itself could be okay, even if it's not technically. Personally, I grown up with covering the knobs. I've been other places, I guess, where not. But so you see the.
Not the without it, so I was thinking you have to buy a new one.
Says, however, he says if you cover the blech, then you shouldn't touch the knobs. If the blech is not covering the knobs, then don't touch the knobs after you cover the fire with the blech.
To adjust it?
Yeah, to adjust it before Shabbos. But then that shows that you're not being Mesiach Das. You have to put the blech on and walk away. I was Mesiach Das and finish with the fire.
People do that all the
So
time.
that's
They put the blech and then they
look underneath it.
they look underneath to
make sure.
right.
It's an ongoing thing. It's like
Right. So if it covers it and you pick it up, that's fine, because then once you put it back down, you covered it again. But if you're not covering it, if your blech is covering the knobs, that wouldn't be a problem. You can pick it up and adjust, and then put it down. Once you put it down, you show that this time you finally covered it for real and you walked away. But if you cover the fire and you're still playing with the knobs, then you show that you're not really being Mesiach Das from the thing that really matters to you. Then you have hot plates where the idea is that you can't adjust. That's the basic idea, but then you have to be careful with hatmana, which is its own issue, and the Rambam will discuss that, I think, in the next Perek. So that's the practical contemporary application of this halacha, and that usually has you covered, and then you don't really have to know all the different pratim of the type.
On top of the china, there's a plate
Mm-hmm.
that gets heated from the hot water.
And
then you can put on Shabbos things.
They have an organization that comes out with all these Shabbos conventions.
Right. All right. So that was all Akira. Now we're going to move on to other types. So this regular stove that it doesn't have that much steam. A tanur, the way it's designed, the tanur from those days, whether it's gruf or it's ketum or you didn't even put in gechalim, it's straw. You can't leave anything inside or on top, or even put something next to it. If it's not fully cooked, or it can still gain to be cooked. Because it has such tremendous steam, heat, you never forgetting about it. Somehow you're afraid you'll still somehow interfere. Even though it's the kind of fire that ordinarily you wouldn't be able to interfere with. Why? Why did they say not allowed to? Because even great, we said you're shoveling the fire out. So it's only most of it. Most of the fire, the strength of the fire. The way the fires are, you can't clear the whole thing out. And because of the tremendous heat, you might be tempted to even play around with whatever sparks you find there, and that would still be a problem. Now we move on to a third type of stove, the kupach. So the Rambam says, "Kupach it's fine at the end of the halacha. Kupach it's somewhere in between akira and a tanner, so its halach is also somewhere in between. So if you heat it with proper fuel, gefas and some wood, or gefas is from the olives or whatever that is, So then it's like a tanur. So the same halacha. You can't put anything on it, near it, as long as it gains from being cooked. Even if you cover it, but if you use the kasha gvava, that stuff, then all of a sudden it has the same din as a kira that has kasha gvava. Then you could leave things on the kupa. And back to the regular kira, we didn't mention about being soymech. We said you can't be soymech to a tanur, and so what about a kira? You're allowed to be soymech. You're allowed to put it next to the kira before Shabbos. Even if it doesn't have the grufa k'tumah. What is the difference anyway? Kira mekem shvisa shtei kederes. A kira is a stove that has room for two, but kupach mekem shvisa is keder achas. A kupach has room for one, and a tanner is just designed differently. What about if the tafshil is? We've been talking about a tafshil that stands to gain. It's either it's shaloi bashal kotzarka, it's simply not fully, or it's fully, but it can still stand to gain. What about a tafshil chai shaloi bashal klal? What if it's completely raw? Or on the opposite extreme, it doesn't stand to gain any more from any more heat. Then you could leave it on the fire. Bein bekira, vikupach, bein betaner, no matter what, without grufa ketuma, you can just put it straight on the fire of any kind and walk away. And even the example we gave earlier, where it is a middle of cooking, still in if you threw in one raw piece right before Shabbos, it acquires the status that as if the whole pot is raw. Again, you can leave it on any fire without covering anything because you already forgot about it. And then the rule is always, will you interfere or not? And if it's the kind of thing where you just totally forget about it, then you can actually mamash leave it on the fire.
What if klal? I don't understand.
If shlei bashal klal, so then you aren't expecting it to. You aren't expecting to be involved. It's nowhere near being ready. If it's near being ready, then we're concerned that you're trying to expedite it. But if it's
the night, Friday night, it'll work its way up and start.
Apparently, apparently, we go after the beginning of Shabbos. If when Shabbos comes in, you're thinking about it, so then we're concerned that you're on top of it. When Shabbos comes in, you're not thinking about it, then that's it. Apparently. There are other shittas, by the way, in different details, but we're just going here with the Rambam, and like I said, with a blach, you should really just put a blach and you'll be fine most of the time. Halacha test. What if you went ahead and did what you weren't supposed to do? What if we said it's aser? You went ahead and did it anyway. Also, then you can't eat it. You have to wait till Motzei Shabbos. And you have to wait for the amount of time it takes to make it from scratch. What if it wasn't deliberate? You simply forgot. You left it on Erev Shabbos.
But that's not the Rambam.
What?
That
if it's totally raw.
If it's totally raw.
Yeah, but not going into all the shit that's not.
Right. And if you just forgot, if it's a kind of dish that the kind where where it needs to be cooked, it's not fully cooked. Also, ad Motzei Shabbos, then still also to Motzei Shabbos. Oh, he doesn't mention B'chdei Sheyasa. However, here all of a sudden we distinguish between the kind. Until now, these were all in the same category, whether it's partially cooked or whether it's fully cooked but can still be still gained from being further cooked. But here we distinguish. We say if it was taka lebashal kotzarka, if taka needed more cooking, then it's aser. But if it was really properly cooked, you just didn't mind if it cooked a little more, then mutter lach b'Shabbos, then you can actually eat it on Shabbos if you forgot. Of course, as usual, the Shraga we're not going to get to it. And now we're going to talk about putting it back. So the Rambam says, whenever we said that you're allowed to leave something on the fire, when you take it off on Shabbos, then you can never put it back. So, for example, like we said, a tafshil chai, something that's completely raw, you're allowed to leave it literally directly on the fire. So sure, you can leave it on the fire, but if you take it off, then there's no way to put it back. If it's an uncovered fire, and it's the kind of situation where you're allowed to. The only situation in which you're allowed to return something is when it was a grufa and ketuma situation. You're only allowed to put it on with grufa and ketuma. Then you also have the benefit of being able to put it back. That's another reason why to have a blech. That way you can always put it back. Meaning, let's say you have something that's fully cooked, so technically you can leave it on the fire without a blech. But then if you take it off, you won't be able to put it back. If you have the blech, you can always put it back. That would be a reason to always cover.
Not allowed to let go of the pot.
Yeah, you're
He's going to say right here. So when you're allowed to, so you can only return it if it's a kira that was covered, or the grufa ktuma basically, or kira and kupach where it's not gecholim. But that's if you didn't put it down, and the assumption is you put it on the floor. They didn't really have counters. When you put it on the floor, so then you can put it back in. Even if it's swept out or covered. And the tanner that has a special halacha. So even if you did grufa ktuma, you can't put it back.
Is our tanner oven considered a tanner in the bottom of the oven?
To leave that fire on.
Some people put it on 200 degrees, and they keep it in. They want to take out Friday night, and then if I'm saying, are you allowed to put it back in? Are you?
Good shaila. I wouldn't try to guess. I have to look it up.
But you don't know if it's the same din as the time.
Haven't seen that detail. Also not familiar with leaving it on. I don't know if it's come up, but it's an interesting question.
There used to be an issue that you open it and then the fire would get stronger again.
So they have a Shabbos mode.
But you have that if it's a Shabbos Yom Tov. People leave their ovens for 72 hours. They leave
it has a mode for 72 hours.
No, so you're gonna encounter that problem. But I'm saying if it's a Shabbos Yom Tov, you're gonna encounter that problem.
I know. That's what I'm asking.
Right. And the rule is that if you're not allowed to put it back on Shabbos, it's also not something you're allowed to put next to on Shabbos. Okay, so that I think concludes that discussion, and then we move on to other aspects, other applications of cooking and fire on Shabbos.
What do you mean by next to?
So we were speaking about Simchen, where it's not on the fire, it's next to it. Here we're talking about our stoves. There isn't really any next to it. Usually the counter is next to it, but talking about a standalone stove or oven where the walls are warm and you can put something up against the wall.
Oh, you can't even benefit from the heat.
Yeah, if it's like a tanner, these types of things where you're not allowed to return something to.
It's room temperature, so you can't.
Once you've taken it off and put it onto the ground or onto a counter or a table. At that point, not only are you not allowed to put it back on the fire, you can't even put it next to it. Once you
let go of the pot, got it.
Yeah. Now regarding a spoon, a ladle, you're not allowed to serve directly from the pot on the fire because you're essentially mixing it, and that contributes to cooking. It's like you're cooking on Shabbos. You are allowed to carry it from one stove and put it on another stove. Even if you're taking it off the stove that has less heat and putting it on a stove with more heat, but not if it's warm by covering it. So from there to there, that you can't do. Only from one stove to another stove. Now about regarding peas and beans. Lo yamali adam kadei asasias v'termusin. Eichav shel mayim. Mitin l'teicha tanu erev Shabbos im koshecha v'yishah esan. She'en l'chol chayitze ben av bishlei bash l'kol ikar ketav sh'shalei bash l'kol tzarkens. Even though peas or beans are water, so even though we said usually if it's not cooked at all, other things you are allowed to put on the fire, even a tanner, but these things, even though they're not cooked at all, it's as if we treat them like they're partially cooked. Because they cook very quickly. So it's the equivalent of, let's say, meat that's partially cooked. In your mind, you want to eat them right away. And therefore, if your mind's on it, we said that's the rule, your mind's on it, then you're going to want to be chaysa. Therefore, it wouldn't be okay on a tanner the way other things might be. Of course, if it's a kirda, group of ktuma, all that, then it's fine. And if you went ahead and did it anyway, then you have to wait the Matzah Shabbos and wait for the time it would take to make it again. Now we're going to talk about.
So as a bar, you can fill it up and turn the knob up right a minute before it's due.
Right.
No, the water has to have been at least halfway boiled.
Right.
Sure.
Well, this halfway is something that
all right.
you should rather Make sure it's
Gonna make sure it's more. No,
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah, now moving on to meat in the Tana. If you left meat for Shabbos in the oven, I'm sorry, so if it's goat, then it's mutter. Because it happens to be that if you try tampering with the coals, it's going to ruin, it's going to singe the meat. All it needs is a little warmth. I'm sorry, but if it's second to Ezer Gdi, I guess one is younger, one is older. So Gdi is very very soft, and Ezen Shur is probably tougher. So Aser Shamiach B'Gacham Lavash needs more cooking, so you might be more involved in getting the fire. And if you seal the oven with mud, mutter because if you're tempted to break it open, and then to start shoveling around, the wind is gonna come in the air, and then it's gonna cause it to stiffen, and it's gonna ruin the meat. So it just happens to be that technically it's not kedai. You wouldn't want to be chesed l'gacham, so that could be a way of being matter. Anything that the wind, the air would ruin. Then we're not concerned that you're going to expose it and try to be chesed. So back to the beginning of the Perek. Why are you allowed to put the flax in the oven at dark? You pass it. We know that if you would uncover it, it would ruin it. So that's why we said that was okay, even though it involves fire. What if you put a young kid goat into the oven? Then we treat it like other meat, and it's also shamiach. Maybe you will, because I guess it's just a much bigger piece. So unless you covered it up, then in that case, then would be okay. Are you allowed to put the keves in? Into right before Shabbos, even though you didn't do anything, because they're on top of it, they know what they're doing, they're not going to do anything wrong. Tazayim, and so you know to roast meat, onion, or egg on the fire. You have to be ready and roasted from before this man. And after that they stay on the fire, then because staying any longer would just make it worse. And if you touch the fire, your mamash going to destroy it. I'll go for Eshain, the mamash on the fire. And that explains what we said in the beginning, that you're allowed to put the incense under the clothing. Because if you try touching the coals, you start it's just going to make it worse, and it's going to make the kalim have a smoky smell instead of a nice smell. So you see what the rule is. The rule is always, and the problem is never that something's happening on Shabbos. The problem is your intervention. And if there's no concern, there's no problem. So in the beginning when we said you could put the wool in the pot can't be on the fire. So if it's on the fire, then you'll be touching the coals. And it has to be covered with mud, or else we're afraid you might mix it after dark.
Which means
bread,
the entry into the oven. That has to be, You
can't put bread in the oven right before Shabbos, or a cake or some sort on the kugel or something on the coals. Unless the side that's not facing was the fact that you actually stick it onto the wall of the tanner or stick it onto the fire. So if the outside will already turn brown, then it's okay. Because then if it's already brown on the outside, so then if you leave it later, and at that point, if you touch the fire, it's just going to ruin it. But if it didn't turn brown on the outside before dark, if it was on purpose, you can't eat it till Matzah Shabbos, and you have to wait for the amount of time it takes to make it again. If it was an accident, this is your bread for Shabbos, so we allow you to take off what you need for 3 meals. Assuming you eat 3 meals, but don't use your regular professional shovel. But cut off pieces with a knife. And the Ramach has a question here. Didn't we say earlier that if you did an isser, then you're not allowed to eat it? The rule is whatever there's an isser, you're not allowed to eat it. And he says the din of gimel sudas is only if you didn't do be isser, where it was brown. Anyway, that's not what the Rambam says. Now let's just finish off. Making a fire. You test chaf chaf and chaf beis. You test. You can make a fire out of anything. Whether it's on the ground or in some kind of vessel. You light it while it's still out of Shabbos. And you use the light or the warmth. But most of it has to be lit already by dark. So that it's already flickering on its own. And if it wasn't the majority, also you can enjoy the light or the warmth. We're afraid that Shabbos is coming in and it's not really lighting right, so you're going to be touching it and causing the fire to go up. And if it's just one piece of wood, so the thickness, the circumference, most of it has to be on fire. That's just anywhere. The Mikdash or the Beis Hamikdash is a different din. You can light the fire where they used to light the fire for warmth right before dark, and we're not afraid because the Gahanim they do things right. They're not going to do things wrong. But if it's reeds or seeds, then you don't have to light most of it. If you started the fire before Shabbos, it's good because the fire catches instantly. There's no need to intervene. But if the reeds or seeds were in some kind of bundlings or palm leaves or something, then they have a regular dinner. And then like regular wood, and again, you have to make sure that the fire caught so you're not touching it. Base finally, so if it's fire that's made out of tar, sulfur, something that's oily, wax, straw, or stubble, you don't have to light most of it before Shabbos. They too catch fire very quickly.
Can I come out?